It's lovely to be here this morning. Um, as we are approaching International Women's Day, it would be really remiss of me not to ask a question of the panel. How have other women supported you to get to where you are in your career today? And Anya, I might start with you.
In terms of women, and I think we've all, seen the Ruth Bader Ginsburg quotes, we can all fight for the things that we care about, but you have to do it in a way that lead others with you. And consider myself very fortunate in what I would call a squiggly career. I look at Martina here. Like my career started out in journalism. I've been in a startup before with Storyful. I've been inside the platform and back to startup life again today. And I think in having had mentors, having had coaches and also sponsors, and I think that's probably a really important thing for all of us to think about, that there are different women and frankly different men who can help you in different ways. And I probably have gotten better at that over the years of realizing that I need a mentor to answer the questions that I have. When you're trying to figure out what grant, what network, what event, so they all have the answers. But then sometimes you need a coach, someone who's going to question your answers, because the answers are actually sometimes deep within you. And I think women are especially good at that. And I've had a lot of female coaches over the years and been brilliant at what I call lava, listen, acknowledge, validate, and then ask again, constantly teasing out your own answers, that you're actually finding the answers within you yourself. And then sometimes having sponsors inside organizations, because so often women maybe aren't in the boardrooms, maybe you're not sometimes in the room where it happens, and we need men in those moments to go, Anya's got it, or Anya could do that. You have to be the one that is absolutely stubborn about the why you are doing something and telling people the how. And that is the importance, I think, of moments like today and events like today, and the support systems around all of us, with a group of women and men here, that you might actually reconnect with your sense of why. Because when you know that, the hows are a little bit easier.
Susan, I wanted to ask you as well. Anya mentioned mentors and supporters there. Susan, how do you go about finding that critical right mentor at the right time?
I guess I'm still very early in my journey as a founder, although I was involved with a company previously in a founding role. And I think a lot of it is trial and error. I suppose I've been fortunate in my life to have had some very good role models in terms of my own mum. I've also worked in very male-dominated environments where I've seen women who've really managed to carve out a really strong position for themselves. But I think it's been a combination of trying to find like-minded individuals and good fortune. People will also try and seek you out. And in a platform like this, the timing is perfect for me, for all of us. I think there's a real catalyst around tech. And I think there are some really positive female role models out there now. I think the whole agenda around Me Too has also sort of changed women's voices. But I think these kind of platforms have been a big driver for me. I've been fortunate. I've got 4 women investors in my company. And I think that's been a huge door opener. And even conceptually and philosophically, that's a big change in terms of how we know we can go out there and find, good women investors, role models, mentors, coaches. They're out there. This is really providing a focus point for that.
What kind of supports?
Yeah. Did you put around yourself when you started out, to ensure your success? Like, what types of steps did you go through when you were starting out?
I'm originally from the US, from California, and I met my co-founder in Dublin when we were in school in Trinity. And I think because we were in an academic setting, we had so many supports and opportunities to find mentors that we just had access to people I probably wouldn't for sure if I just kind of come here and tried to set up. Trinity itself had amazing programs. We started out in Launchbox, which was fantastic. So that was just kind of startup support generally. I found, I'm in Dogpatch now, I found Dogpatch Lab pretty early on, just kind of searching startup supports as we were interested in kind of starting the business. just kind of the mentorship that they provided was incredible to be able to kind of plug into the ecosystem right away. And then I think beyond that, I kind of went through the traditional Irish startup plan of then going into New Frontiers phase 1 and then New Frontiers phase 2 and then finding investment. And so I found that just Ireland in general has such an amazing support system for startups. And I was connected early on with amazing mentors through New Frontiers. Also happened to be another female founder, which was incredible to have access to. So I think just from that aspect, it was great. And then of course, my background again was kind of that squiggly career of different industries, but I mainly was always in the startup space of different kind of varying sizes. And so being able to reach back out to the people that I'd met there and keep connected with them, and also kind of realizing through all the different supports that I found here, maybe it's actually someone that is in a different industry but could help me with a specific problem. And so I'm working kind of to figure out what I needed to ask for, and then kind of figuring out that piece. I think that was actually probably one of the hardest things for me, is actually knowing one what the biggest issue was, kind of getting down to the root of it, and then finding the right person. And it maybe wasn't kind of who I thought it was originally. So going down that, but now kind of I think throughout the last, and we started about 3 years ago, so throughout the last 3 years, kind of building out that list of who would we ask and reach out to for different things. And it's always growing and getting better at kind of keeping in contact with people. And so, you always know, one, who to reach out to, but two, you're always there for them if they need to reach out to you.
Patricia, I would like to talk to you a little bit about tech, and particularly when you are building new road for new tech in new markets, and that's really, really difficult. So for any founder here who's working on brand new tech in a new way of doing business, new way of doing things, what kind of tips would you give that founder?
It's tough, but if it wasn't tough, you're probably not really doing something new and innovative. You need champions, so there's probably going to be people, probably in multinationals, maybe in government, maybe in other supports, that have experience, that if you approach them with it and get them, they don't need to be an investor all the time. They just need to be an advocate for you. And often I find when you're building stuff or you're inevitably going to raise money on it, the more people you have rowing in behind you, even if it's somebody in the industry that you may want to sell to in the future, because people often think, but I need clients and I need invoice and I need revenue. Actually, a letter of support that's not legally binding, but they say, and you make sure you tell them that, right? Say, write me a letter of support. It's not legally binding, but if we build it, you would be interested in it. And that goes a long way, because sometimes when you're building something really new, it takes time. So often you don't have, it's not like you can throw something together and get it out in the market and test it in a couple of months, it's tough. It's tough because you're almost expected to do that. But when you're really going deep in building tech, there's other ways of proof points. Be cheeky, reach out to somebody you don't know, or, a cold contact even. Like I know it's much better to get warm contacts, but we don't all have that in our network. Mm-hmm. So LinkedIn is a great way to do it. Always ask for advice. Don't ask for too much of people's time, but just say, I'm building something. I'd love your opinion. And people are good. Like, people are open to things like that. Just start building up a network. And that if it's somebody locally here, great. If you can have a coffee or virtual coffee, whatever you can do. But, building something new in tech, you probably have a unique experience that you're bringing to it. And that's really important. But there's bound to be other people who will go, I get it. Yeah. It'll resonate with them. And then find a way to help them support you, because when you go to pitch to investors, you could point to these people going, these are my referees, these people believe me, and maybe they can be an advisor to you, maybe they can be, there's loads of informal ways even early to get people on board, and that helps.
Anya, building the tech and making the road that you're making for your company in Kaizen, what kind of places, what markets do you think are really emerging and hot right now that for founders who are working on really interesting technology should take a look at?
In my world, like that thread line I talked about earlier is about doing things that help people better understand the world around them. So it doesn't matter if you're traditional journalists, as I have been in the past, or now in Kinsen, where we're dealing with the world of disinformation, or what some people might call fake news. And the world in which I operate, let's see the scenes we saw on Saturday on Grafton Street. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, even back in 2010 in Storyful, we were doing so much debunking of content that some people were spreading maliciously for propaganda, political propaganda reasons. You had people doing it with bad intent to sow confusion simply because they were doing it for their own adrenaline, psychological hits. Some of them doing it for social reasons, others doing it for financial reasons. So what we saw in Sarda has been years in the making. So you've just had bad actors trying to use platforms of that nature. But you also have this wicked problem of trust, ultimately, world over, in multiple institutions, be it your maybe health institutions, could be your media institutions in some countries, it could be your governance and political systems. And that's something I think we all have to think about, is that word trust. In my industry, it's about how do we build trust in quality news and information and ensure that you rebuild that connection, because we think back to the 2000s, that whole generation, it was a move fast and break things. If you were a startup, if you were a founder, if you were in the technology ecosystem. Now I would suggest we have to get more to a moment of move slow and fix things, and be really thoughtful about how we go about building our businesses, our startups, regardless of your size, to embrace that. And to think about this question of trust, like what are the things that you are going to do to ensure that your work, your team, your product, your service, it is helpful and not harmful. And it's a question I think an awful lot about, because we live in a world now where the unintended consequences of platforms of that move fast and break things, the unintended consequences of more content everywhere has meant we have broken the connection between people and quality news and information. And then you have a vacuum. And in that vacuum steps in our disinformation, bad actors and super spreaders. And in that collapse of trust, we have this wicked problem. And that wicked problem is what we saw on Saturday. That didn't happen overnight. That hasn't even happened in the last 12 months. That has been years in the making. And I think, that's one very small example in my industry, but I'm sure if you all thought about it in your different respective industries of what are you doing every day to build trust? Are you constantly asking yourself that question of, is my work helpful or harmful? And am I doing things that all the time think about unintended consequences? And critically, are we all thinking all the time about our plan, not only our plan B, but our C, D, E, F, that we are knowingly asking ourselves of everything that we do every day, what is the worst that could happen? And being really comfortable sometimes with the answers that you get, and then deciding, okay, actually I have to fine tune this, I need to dial this back, or in some moments actually have to go back and hit a reset altogether. And the last thing I would say on that, when I think about, what it's less what's hot and more about the process. Like, I think we probably, all of us on this call today, know the problems that we're trying to solve, and we know our why, and we know our values, and we know our strengths, and we know what it is we're trying to do in the world with that. But I often think that your why is really important, but your hows are obviously critical, our tactics and strategies, but that we have to bring it back all the time then to execution. And sometimes actually making sure that the most boring work, or what I sometimes tell the team, the unsexy plumbing, that is actually the critical part of what we do. Because when you're not paying attention to the detail and only obsessing with the end outcomes, mistakes are made, and you're not doing your scenario planning, and you're not looking at those lists, and you're not thinking about unintended consequences. Because I think in all of this, particularly now more than ever, as we all live through a global pandemic, like probably before last year, we all obsessed about our 5-year projections and our 5-year business plans. And you sit here in March 2021 and you go, it's laughable. It is laughable to think that we can do 5-year projections in this massive moment of ambiguity. And that in this moment, what we all need to actually do is experiment, to iterate, to try and find out what is it that people need in their world today, and a world that is fast changing. And if I can leave you with one last piece of advice I would give, and it's absolutely nailing your problem definition and constantly coming back to that, and your why, and then only doing your how. And one of the things I've had to set myself as a discipline is, but I was very fortunate to go to Columbia University some years ago, and they drill in this formula to you that if you want to do something that is going to be driving change, it's a product or service, something different, change has to equal DXVXP. And your D is dissatisfaction, your V is vision, and your P is process. So you can have all of the process, brilliant process, you can have all the vision in the world, but if you do not absolutely understand the D, what makes people dissatisfied, what are they unhappy with, what is the problem that you're trying to solve, the vision and the process won't matter. And I think that's a discipline all of us have to come back when we think about our startups. What is the D that we're solving for? And then think about our V and our P.
Susan, I wanted to come back to you. And you mentioned that you had female investors, which is fantastic. And I suppose for me, I wanted to know, for the women in the room and the men in the room who are thinking about raising right now, can you give me a few quick fire tips about what you need to start planning now to get in your toolbox to be ready?
First of all, I'd highlight just getting the relationships in place. Relationships are fundamental. Thinking back, I don't think we were actually quite ready for investment, if I'm brutally honest. I think the pandemic drove a lot of things. I talked about serendipity earlier. But in terms of being ready, I'd had some experience in a previous company, so I was really clear on what the problem was that we were trying to solve. And I think I could articulate that quite well. And I think that came across to people, that I met. They understood that we have a big problem we're trying to solve. And I think in a peculiar way, it comes back to trust, which Anya had spoken about, building those relationships where people trust you. And then that in itself, the network effect of that, I think shouldn't be underestimated. We live on a tiny island. There's, good and bad elements to that in terms of our geography. But that I think was a key element for us. So we knew what we were trying to solve. We knew it was going to be difficult raising. We've hardware and software, and everybody just kept saying to me, write it out, it'll be over in a year. And in fact, they were saying initially it'll be over in 6 months. We didn't. We kept going. We just kept going. And I think that kind of resilience also was apparent to people, that we're not giving up on our problem. We weren't giving up on our solution. And that, I think, helped us to get ready. People talk about pitching, and I've seen a lot about pitching to a lot of investors. We didn't do a lot of pitching, if I'm honest. I think we've been kind of fortunate. We're in med tech, we're in respiratory. It's something that's obviously it's of interest at the moment. But I think it was just having that mental readiness. We didn't go out with a really fancy deck. We didn't have any money to go and prepare a big deck. So if anybody was sitting there thinking, we've got to go and do 12 slides that are all singing or dancing, we didn't have that. But we defined our problem well. We defined our solution well. We, I think, capitalized on a small group of very interested people, and our very first investors really helped us to expand that.
Patricia, I'm going to ask you a question now, and it comes back to relationships, and business is all about relationships, and also relationships with your funders. Have you had the experience where maybe an investor passed initially and then maybe came back later on and said yes or approached you? It's not always straight sailing, is it?
No, it's not. It's trust, and it's time. And as Susan said there, I think trust is huge. Actually, I had a very long list of people that I drafted initially. For some of them, we weren't ready, or often what they do like to do, we often call it the slow no, but it's often not slow no. Sometimes they're actually drawing out the process a little bit in order to see whether you do what you said you would do. So just be really super aware when you start talking to people and you say in 3 months I'm going to have this, and in 6 months I have this. Make sure you're going to have it, because nothing gets closed in less than 3 months or 6 months. Realistically, it's 9 months to a year, especially in the early stages. So what we did was we started talking to some people initially. They were interested, and they get back and we're going to have a talk about it, but it was all very drawn out, and maybe it goes a little quiet, right? It took a while. We found the right investors. We found our lead investors. And then what I did was, because we'd secured some funding, not secured, it's kind of like a soft commit, it's often called, right? Again, not legally binding. You have to try and bring people along the journey with you. You're not putting my money if I don't hit this target. And then saying to people, well, remember I talked to you 6 months ago. Here's our update. And I remember sending a 1-page update 6 months after I talked to a whole bunch of people. And we had secured a lead investor. And all of a sudden, it just changed everything. Because they looked and they said, not only did you do what you said you're going to do, you actually exceeded it. And you've got a lead investor. And all of a sudden, and then we go, and we're closing in the next 2 months. And all of a sudden, that sense of urgency started to come. So I would say absolutely go back. Be careful as well. You don't want to be trying to convince people, because I do find a lot of our investors who came on and have been supporters over the years, were the ones that got it very quickly as well. There was a few that I would have gone back and tried to convince, and then, you know, they were like, I don't think so. And I'd be there going, no, I'm going to win them over. And I'm like, you know, maybe that's not the best idea either. But if someone says no, they say no, just move on. Or they're really not keen, they're not a good fit probably. And spend your time with the people that maybe are going to be slower in their decision making. And that's okay too. Sometimes with angels, it's very personal. They're writing a personal check. It's not, they don't work for a firm that's paying their salary. Like, so be okay with that. But be very conscious when you say you're going to do some follow up with them, give them updates, and then maybe give a clear date that you're closing and see, you know, but you have to have a little bit of confidence. You have to have a broad amount of interest to be able to pull that off as well. Be conscious of the numbers you say. And if you change your numbers, make sure you've got a damn good reason for it, like, because people are watching for those details. They're looking for your ambiguity. They're looking for you to change your mind. They're honestly looking for reasons to not invest sometimes, because they're looking for red flags. So just be confident, be assured, don't get swayed into inflating your numbers beyond something you can realistically achieve out, because a lot of people will do that. But in the early stages, be careful of that, because that's also a stick to beat you with, right? There's a balance that I say, oh, in 6 months, I'm going to sell all this. And then they're sitting there 6 months later going, well, you didn't really sell all that. You know, be careful. Just be confident, be careful. Yeah.
Guys, and Lizzie, I'm going to ask you the final question, if that's okay, this morning. Tech for good, it's incredibly important, and it's certainly, we can see it's a sector that's growing hugely. And I wonder for you, is it more about the tech or the good, or is it both? What drives you there?
Yeah, I think for me, it's both. I kind of grew up around tech and I love innovation and all the amazing things that can come out of it. But more and more in today's world, everything needs to think about, like, what impact are you having on the world? And I think I was really fortunate in the last company I was with before moving to Ireland. I'd seen that it wasn't considered a tech for good company. We were a finance company, but I was actually able to see all of the positive outcomes that came, because essentially, like, the company was able to go beyond traditional credit score and give credit to people that didn't traditionally have it. And the way that it changed people's lives, and being able to see that firsthand for me was just incredible. And it was such a simple kind of idea of, like, maybe it was even buying something frivolous, but like knowing that you were able to do that, and just like the power that as, you know, someone in tech, that you can help kind of facilitate that for someone, was a really kind of powerful thing for me to experience. And so when I moved here and ended up meeting my co-founder, we were kind of talking about what could we do that would make a big impact, but that would be really disruptive and innovative to an industry. And we started looking at the charity space and what could be disruptive there, because charities really, like, you can't take a risk on innovation, because your people are donating money to you, and it's to go to a cause. And so something in the end, it could not work, and then you spent, you know, donations for something like that. And so we wanted to be a company that could take that risk off of charities and be able to be the innovative partner for them. And so the first step for us was building this donation platform that you could give your small change to. But there's so many things that we eventually see we could possibly go into. And so for us, I mean, for me, like, in particular, like, it was both. It was definitely like, I love innovation and what that can do for any industry, but being able to do that in a way that actually gives back to the world and helps people is just, I mean, it helps you kind of get up every day and stay passionate. So
I like that notion about partnering with charities, and you take the risk, if you like, you de-risk this innovative piece that you've built. I like that idea. So that might be a tip for other people in the room today who are interested in tech for good. Look at about how you can partner with others to, I suppose, fulfill your mission.
First question is going to be very straightforward, because it dominated our breakout room, and it was the question I was going to ask anyway. In terms of our 4 female founders, you are CEOs, you're women in leadership positions. Do you think it is harder for females in terms of pitching, in terms of being recognized, in terms of promoting your company, that a male counterpart? And many of the women in my breakout room were saying they feel it's difficult in terms of the pitching stage or getting your voice heard in a sector which is dominated by men. and the figures would prove that. So I'm going to start with Patricia, because she's smiling and she's in my eyesight. So Patricia, what would you say to that?
It dominated. Well, it didn't dominate. It was at the latter half of our breakout session as well. Yes, it's of course it's harder, and I think anybody who says otherwise is probably being a little disingenuous or way overly blind when it comes to this. The numbers bear it out. It is an issue. One of the things, I mean, I talk about this a bit, and I don't think it's an easy fix, but we need to fix the investment committees. And we had a great chat that maybe sometimes at the government level, local level, they are balanced, but where you do find the higher up the investment levels you go, you see less and less women. I mean, you can't, expecting to have to fix women. Nobody here needs to be fixed. We're doing a very good job, but just we may not pitch in a way that's expected. We may not pitch in a very male way, or maybe there's a lot of unconscious, subconscious bias by men and women of what is the AAA founder.
And actually,
swaggers into the room, loads of confidence, everybody starts throwing money at them, and women, we just don't do that as much. We have a different way of pitching, and it's been borne out in the fact that Fortune 500 companies, bigger companies, SMEs that have female leaders actually adhere to their projections, financial projections, so much more than male. The outcomes are good, they're solid, they're honest, but that's not liked in some ways. Or maybe what is being pitched, the topic, maybe it's something in female health, makes people uncomfortable, maybe it's something, it's solving a problem for that someone experiences in their life, and they always advocate that you do that, you try and solve a problem in your life. But if you're pitching to a very male investment committee, or GP brought up to the investment committee, that isn't balanced, you're not going to have as much success.
Thank you, Patricia. We just have 10 minutes left on this question, but question section. Can I ask Susan the same question? Because from a different perspective, have you yourself experienced what has come through in some of the breakout rooms, and other people are, texting me and I've said it's come through, or have you ever experienced, as Mary McKenna experienced in her breakout room, imposter syndrome? And what can we do to address that?
Well, funny enough, in our room, we talked about the same themes as well. And we came back to entitlement, that there is, as Patricia's just described, there's a swagger into the room, we're going to get the money and that's it. The Rose Report, we've all read it, we all know what the reality is. From my personal experience, I got challenged very hard about my figures. I also got challenged very hard about my term sheet. And this is something that I won't go into a lot of detail on, but I suspect that perhaps a male-led team wouldn't have been challenged in that way. And I'll be very frank, it took quite a while to get that problem resolved, and it is resolved in favor of the company. But yeah, I don't think I have overtly suffered from imposter syndrome, but I think there probably is something kind of buried deep in a lot of women's psyche, which is, you could be in the room, but you're prepared to take on the challenges. And one of our breakout contributors talked about mentoring work she'd done with a male and a female, two separate companies. And she talked about the amount of work they'd done for their finances. And she pointed out that one of the woman involved had kind of overworked her finances in anticipation of things being very challenging, which kind of, made things much harder for herself. So perhaps there's something anticipatory in us that doesn't really help. It's not necessarily imposter syndrome. Instead, you're ready for it and you overwork things, and it doesn't present that thing that, Patricia talked about, that kind of swaggering in. You kind of, you make it more difficult. You're not speaking the same language potentially, but that's not an excuse at all. But I think there's something there about behavioural change, as Patricia says, in investor committees from the outset. It's not further up, it's lower down.
And I'm going to come back to that theme. Lizzie, have you had any experience of this, of unconscious bias, or that you have fought to have your voice heard in terms of pitching and other key issues that you have to address as a founder?
Yeah, I think I'm sure I have. I think I remember actually just earlier in my career, I felt this probably very strongly. I think I've always kind of worked in a male-dominated industry, and so it's probably not surprising. And I had actually an older female colleague take me aside and kind of explain to me how to be heard, and how to actually use body language to be heard, and to be kind of understood and taken seriously. And so I think that really helped me. And that, I mean, I that probably happened when I was about 25, and I've taken that with me every step of the way. So I feel like now every time I see that start to kind of happen, I know, like, maybe everyone's kind of talking around you and it's hard to get your voice heard sometimes, or like depending on your personality type. And so like learning things like leaning in and showing that you're going to talk, and kind of using your body language and your actual kind of physical presence to make sure that your voice is heard. I actually also, someone recently told me like wearing color is something that gets people to remember, like, you were actually that person that was wearing red. So not being, obviously I didn't really kind of show that off today, but you were the person that wasn't really like the bland person in the room, and you're memorable. Things like that I think actually help kind of get your voice heard and make you memorable. And I think it's not something that you want to have to do, but I think it's something you kind of learn and bring into, or I do at least bring into kind of daily life, so that you do get your voice heard more, and that kind of goes away a bit. But imposter syndrome wise, for sure, all the time, I think, me personally, like, I always come in and I'm like, am I the one that knows this the best? But like, you have to kind of remind yourself, like, yes, I've been working on this for so long, I know what I'm talking about. I have to show that confidence when I'm coming up. And just because someone maybe has 10 years more experience doesn't mean they've been working on this specific problem. And so just knowing that and reminding yourself to be confident even when you're less confident is really important.
And thanks for sharing that. Also, turning to Anya, who is wearing red. And by the way, Mary McKenna has been very quick on the chat room saying everybody's now going to turn up in red. Anya, can I ask you, what are your own experiences in relation to this? And do you think that's something that you have experienced and that women in the sector experience as a whole? Because you are in a leadership role, but are you treated any differently? You have a co-founder that is male, for instance.
Yeah, and the answer, is yes. And I think my experience, I've actually seen it since borne out in research. I think it goes back to 2017, where it was a TechCrunch competition. You had 180 entrepreneurs pitched to VCs, and the final analysis showed that men got promotion questions, women got preventive questions. So men getting the upside, potential gains, tell us the future of the world. Women getting the questions that are like potential losses, tell us about the risks. Have you considered these mitigation factors? And I have definitely experienced that differential of tell us your 5-year forecast versus what are the mistakes that you've made and how you're going to rectify them. So I definitely see that promotion preventative questions. And I would say, back to some of the questions that I think everybody's thinking about today, there's so much lazy analysis that it goes on out there about the confidence gap and the imposter syndrome. And that's not to say that some of that isn't real for women. I'm not for a moment minimizing that. But I do think when women have been supported, because we sometimes talk a lot about financial capital when we should be thinking about social capital as well. And what are we doing to make sure that women absolutely know their values, their strengths, their interests, their sense of impact? Because I think all of our sense of impact is a little bit different. For some of you, it is going to be about what can I do that is security, that is going to put food on the table, pay my mortgage. For some, it's going to be about connection and a feeling of belonging to something. And at the tip of the sphere, for some of us, it's going to be about legacy and impact and doing good in the world without. And it's just knowing that. And then when you know that about yourself and what is that inner fire, as I sometimes talk about it, well, then you can silence. And if I can recommend one last book today, I know I'm always recommending this book, but I swear I don't have royalties in it. It's Playing Big by Tara Moore. And I read it 2-3 years ago. And that was a game changer for me, because I realized we all have this inner critic. You're never going to get rid of it. But what you do have to try and do is tame it. And that you have to find ways to kind of get around it so that you go past your familiar zone, the comfort zone, and sometimes just go out into the unknowns. And I was definitely someone who was guilty of what she called the this, then that. And I would often be like, well, I need to have that experience, or I need to have the MBA, or I need to be further up the ladder before I can ask that person for a coffee. And she's all about just go
Okay.
to that, like have the courage of your convictions. So that's one thing. And the last thing I will say in terms of this moment, why it's not about a confidence gap and more the system being broken, is that like you look at all of the data, the investors, they are male. And that's not to say men don't invest in women. Of course they do. But they have their own unconscious biases. They look through the lens a little bit differently, like in terms of how the whole world is designed in favor, unfortunately, of some male biases going back since the beginning of human nature. But we also have to be honest about the context of this moment. Like a year ago, we were talking about COVID being this great equalizer. Well, it's not. Like we are living through what is called a she session, in that this actually negatively impacts women more than men in this moment, what we are going through in a global pandemic. Like 40% of the global labor force are women, but they account for more than half the total job losses world over. You look at this so-called double shift. We have to be honest about the fact that unpaid childcare, unpaid domestic work, it is often by and large women. And you look at the statistics coming out of like places like the UK, male professors at the moment turning in their papers. Women, no, they're asking for extensions because they're doing this double shift. They're caring for others and then trying to do the work. And we have to be honest in this moment about what that takes.
And thanks, Sonia, for all of that and imparting all that advice and also your experiences. We have 1 minute left. So everything has been raised in relation to child minding that it may come up, or the potential that female founders may get to that stage, and it may deter them in terms of their work and focus on their startups, to specific supports, to attracting female investors. But I'm going to just use this minute as a whip around. I'm going to start with Patricia. One piece of advice to all the women who are on this call today, what would you give them? You know, very quickly,
every meeting you do, every virtual coffee you have, get them to give you one referral. Who should I talk to? Can you make that introduction for me?
That is brilliant advice and very practical advice. Susan.
Just keep going, believe in yourself and just keep going, and use these networks.
That's brilliant. And so say all of us. Lizzie?
I think go into every following on the coffee from Trish, going into everything with kind of a question or an ask that you want to get out of that, not get out of that person, but you want to learn from that person, so you can kind of continue to move forward.
And Anya.
Book time in your calendar every week for on the balcony. Get out of the trenches, step onto the balcony mentally and just go, what am I trying to do? What's the 6 week, 6 month, 6 year strategy?
Brilliant. All practical advice that everybody walks away today, and also some comfort that everybody gave some very open, insightful information of what they've experienced. Some people in this room are obviously experiencing at the moment, but they've got through it. They're all very successful. And on that note, we want to thank all our female founders for sharing their stories and being so open and honest and giving their advice in such a frank way today, and for inspiring the next generation and also the other female founders to achieve their ambitions and to build their own tech companies. So thank you to Patricia, to Susan, to Anya and to Lizzie. And I also want to say, of course, a big thank you to Intertrade Ireland, which supported this morning's webinar. As the cross-border trade and business development body, Intertrade Ireland helped us to bring these 4 very successful female founders from across the island together this morning. And I also want to encourage everybody to visit Intertrade Ireland's website to learn more about all the great work they're doing in relation to innovation, to trade, to Brexit, to tendering, and to COVID supports. And also finally, and most importantly, I want to remind you that the 2021 annual Intertrade Ireland Venture Capital Conference is taking place tomorrow. And it's not too late to register for this important event, which will feature key contributions and insights from founders, investors, and stakeholders from all across the island of Ireland and also beyond. It's not to be missed, and registration closes at 5 o'clock this evening. So if you're interested, please visit their website, which is www.intertradeIreland.com, and then select events. Okay, so there's no excuse. We'll be there. I hope you'll join us. Finally, I want to say these kind of events, which are really successful, are always a team effort. We're delighted to be collaborating and co-hosting with RDI and Awaken Hub. And we also know that behind the scenes, there are so many people that work on our behalf to bring this together, that are not speaking, but they have done so much work on behalf of us all. So on behalf of Scale Ireland, I want to thank Sheila, who project managed our participation, and Eve, who ran our social media campaign, and last but not least, Luke, our communications lead, who is blessed among women in every way, and we're also blessed with them. And also for 20 seconds, I'm going to put Mary McKenna and Ray Dean on the spot to just thank their teams. So Mary.
Yeah, I'd like to thank Mary Carty for doing a great job of the panel Q&A today, and I'd like to thank Claire McGee and Sinead Crowley for hosting breakout rooms along with me, and thanks Martina for a great event.
Agree completely, Martina. Thanks a million to Fionnuala O'Callaghan, who's running the breakout rooms in the background. For me, it's been a lovely hour, genuinely lovely to spend with you all, so thank you.
Thank you, Radine. And by the way, we're looking ahead. I hope everybody has a wonderful International Women's Day on Monday. There will be some good news finally on the day itself, because Tech Ireland will be publishing its latest figures on the level of investment raised by female founders for 2020. And it is a really, really positive news story and something that is inspiring on the day itself. So amidst all the doom and gloom, some positive news about female founders and what they are doing. And without further ado, I just would like to thank everyone for attending this morning. I think it flew so quickly because it was a nice conversation and everybody took something away from it. And thank you to our co-hosts and also to our supporters. Thank you, everyone.